A few weeks ago, there was a lawsuit that was being filed on by a school district in Lubbock, Texas. Now there's an update to the case. From Texas Tribune, the article Lubbock Cooper ISD passed a resolution denouncing racist bullying in schools, and parents say it's a publicity stunt. Students reported enduring racial slurs, the sounds of whips cracking, and monkey noises as they walked down the school hallways. Let's read this article. Weeks after a federal civil rights complaint was filed against the Lubbock Cooper ISD for infraction of racist bullying, the district's board of trustees passed a resolution condemning racism during a special meeting on Thursday. This was almost a week ago. Tracy Camp, a mother involved in the filing, was excited to see the bullying was finally being addressed. 9 months, almost a year after she brought it to initial complaint to the district. The complaint filed by parents against the district alleges that their children have faced daily harassment and violent bullying from peers at Lower Bush Middle School in Lubbock, Texas. Black students are subject to derogatory language and racial slurs, both online and in person, as well as the sounds of cracking whips or monkey noises as the students walk down the halls, according to the filing. The harassment eventually became violent. Kemp's 15-year-old son was a target of assaults by his classmates. In response, she said she and other parents brought the evidence to the school administration to create a QR code for students to quickly report bullying. Still, parents say school officials will not take action to end the bullying or punish the students doing it, despite their zero tolerance stance. The black students involved in the fights were punished. Zanaya Lewis was bullied while attending the middle school last year, is now a freshman at Lubbock Cooper High School. At the crowded board meeting on Thursday, she asked the board what their definition of zero tolerance was, but her question was met with silence. They were like, "What is zero tolerance?" That's how they were. The board was then asked by Phyllis Grant, a member of the Lubbock NAACP, if they could answer her. Melanie Lee, the president of the Lubbock NAACP, emphasized to the board that they could still fix the problems. The vice president read the multi-page resolution, most of which was going over the district's version of the events for the past year. It includes their stance that Superintendent Keith Bryan with the families involved and that no additional racially motivated incidents have been reported to the district. This article goes on to say to the end that because they were hopeful about this issue. But still, since we reported this weeks ago, there's now been a change of heart within the school district. So really, I guess if you look at this in both ways, what you really have here is, I don't know, something to look forward to as the school year continues on with the 22-23 school year. But there's still lawsuits going on. It ain't just about parents suing the schools. Nah, it's the schools suing social media. So here are the 3 reasons why Seattle Public Schools are using big tech over youth mental health crisis. Well, it's not really a lawsuit. This is from NPR. The school system accuses social media platforms of increasing students' anxiety and depression. The Seattle schools allege that the very design of these platforms, which seek to maximize the amount of time users spend on them, is flawed and dangerous particularly to kids. That's one reason. Another reason is the school system says it doesn't have the resources to manage the crisis made worse by social media, like these school threats that are happening. The Seattle-based law firm is representing the school district in the lawsuit on the basis, which means attorneys will not get paid unless they win, and companies are required to pay a fine, according to Tim Robinson, the head of media relations with the Seattle Public Schools. The third reason is tech companies have a powerful legal shield, but it's about to be challenged. It's nearly impossible to sue social media companies over the content of their platforms because of a law known as Section 230, part of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. It says tech companies can't be held liable for what others share on their sites, but it could soon change. The Supreme Court hear arguments next month in a case that aims to limit Section 230 and put social media companies' recommendations front and center. Those recommendations formally at the heart of the Seattle Public Schools lawsuit too. So therefore, the heads of social media companies can come in and say, well, we cannot be held accountable. We got to hold the kids responsible. So therefore, we should not be held responsible. Cowley's not involved in either lawsuit, but he does have two children in Seattle Public Schools, one in the 7th grade, one in the 3rd grade. He said he isn't surprised that this is happening in Seattle, home of the tech giants including Amazon and Microsoft, which has always been the home front of the internet and the digital world. Even if the case gets to day court, its filing allows the school district to draw attention to the issue. So we'll keep looking into the story next month, and on that next month when that happens, we'll keep you posted on this. But still not over. Coming up next, the 3 takeaways on the Seattle schools lawsuit against the big tech. We're still looking into this, so after the break, we're going to give you those 3 takeaways. Stay with us. Is there any way to end bullying? If you just joined us, we're talking about the Seattle schools suing social media companies for their part in this issue. Now we're going to talk about the 3 takeaways on that lawsuit that's going to be filed. The 3 takeaways are this: the school system accused social media companies of increasing students' anxiety and depression. This could be the same one. So maybe asking, isn't it the same one? But they could be different. If it's the same one, you may skip out of this part and wait for the next segment. The school system says it doesn't have the resources to manage a crisis made by the work of social media. So therefore, by looking into this, I may think they may not have a case about this. So really what you have over here is an issue regarding social media, but maybe this could end the threats and the bullying. If you look at it both ways, it's like this on the old scale. It can end bullying and it can end threats. It's like this on the old scale. And tech companies have a legal shield, but it's about to be a challenge. But now they're suing it, and it's going to happen next month. So when you look at cases like this, it's like, yay, we're going to hold social media accountable, but there's a law protecting this, but that law could be changed. K-12 Drive has the article talking about this, and the board could just sit up here and say about this. So let's listen to the article. Let's listen to the article.
Seattle Public Schools sues social media companies amid youth mental health crisis. Dive brief. Laying blame for the youth mental health crisis squarely on the doorstep of social media companies, Seattle Public Schools have filed a lawsuit alleging that the platforms purposefully designed, marketed, and promoted the platforms to maximize use among children and teens despite knowing the harm that would cause. The lawsuit claims the social media companies behind Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, and TikTok violated Washington's public nuisance law by igniting a mental health crisis in Seattle public schools. That law defines a public nuisance as something which affects equally the rights of an entire community or neighborhood, although the extent of the damage may be unequal. Though the lawsuit did request an exact dollar amount,
far too many of these school threats
to pay for education and treatment for excessive and concerning use of social media. The suit also seeks maximum statutory and civil penalties, including actual and compensatory damages allowed under the public nuisance law. Dive inside. The Seattle Public Schools lawsuit cited President Joe Biden's 2022 State of the Union, in which he called for holding social media companies accountable for their impact on youth mental health. The district said it is suing to do just that. Noting children were struggling even before the pandemic, Biden said, "We must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit." In 2021, the American Academy of Pediatrics declared worsening mental health among children to be a national emergency. Though the issue predated COVID-19, it was exacerbated by lockdown isolation, family health concerns, disrupted home lives, and other pandemic-related factors. Additionally, a November study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found higher youth suicide rates connected to mental health workforce shortages. As a result of social media companies' alleged damage to student mental health in Seattle public schools, the district said in its lawsuit that it has had to hire more staff to address mental, emotional, and social health issues. The district said it has also created lesson plans for students to learn about the harms of social media. It has also had to increase disciplinary measures while spending more time addressing bullying, harassment, and threats it alleges that social media causes. In response to the lawsuit, Antigone Davis, global head of safety at Meta, said the parent company of Facebook and Instagram has created over 30 tools to help families and teens on their websites, Axios reports. Such tools include assisting with parent supervision and allowing them to limit their children's time spent on Instagram, Davis said. We'll continue to work closely with experts, policymakers, and parents on these important issues, Davis said.
So again, it could be linked to these threats or suicide. So during the pandemic, all the kids were doing online learning, but that could really affect their health. But for those who aren't committed to truancy, that's what happened almost 3 years ago. So that's really what you have here. You got people here who just playing with a game of fire. So that's what you really got. Coming up, there are now new school threats. This one from that prompted school dean to resign, a teen accused of threatening a high school, and a school district bringing officers in to address this issue. So that could all be coming to light. Stay with us. There are now 3 new school threats. One, and there was also one that prompted the dean of students to resign. It's one of the few moments in 6 years done threats like this that, not done 6 years of doing the show, but I've never heard of a threat that prompted a dean of students to resign. Take a look at this.
Well, there was another letter that was sent by the district to parents, and district said there was another email. There's an email that was sent to another staff member, also threatening them and to also quit their job. And this came from outside of the school building, and I can tell you this: it was sent on Friday, and the staff member didn't see the email until Sunday night, and that's when the Richmond School District sent out that letter. And right now, police are going to be present in 3 buildings at Richmond Community Schools. There's been a string of threats specifically targeting staff members at Richmond Community Schools. Last week, the newly hired dean of students, who was only 9 days in on the job, resigned after anti-Semitic threats were made towards him and his family. And while the board was dealing with that and hammering out details for security this week, another staff member on Sunday night contacted the district after they received a threatening email. The email was sent out on Friday, but was not discovered by the staff member until Sunday night. The email, according to a letter sent out by the district, said the staff member would be harmed if they didn't quit their job. It also had personal information and named specific individuals. The district says this threat was different than the previous one last week because it came from an email and the letter was not left inside the building. Last week, 7 Action News spoke with Richmond Community Schools Superintendent Brian Walmsley, who had this to say.
My position as the leader of this district is whoever it is, I'm going to push to have the fullest extent of the law in the prosecution of this individual. This is serious.
And last week, the district turned over security footage and building access records to police. And right now, police are combing through that security footage to see if they can find anyone going into that building. And the district is also asking parents or students if you know of anything to contact the Richmond Police Department. In Richmond this morning, and Peter Maxwell, 7 Action News.
All right, thank you so much, Peter. Of course, we'll continue to follow this story, Kurt.
And so will I. There's now another that's been happening just almost a day ago, just yesterday.
Far too many of these school threats the last year or so. The difference about this one is the rant by the 16-year-old student against the teacher was actually all caught on video by another student who thought it was important enough to gather some evidence. Now these threats, I read the transcript, they're just chilling. Specific death threats against this teacher and her family, even going into detail about how he would carry it out.
I don't know where he is, and I don't know what he's going to do.
The voice of a teacher living in fear after a vile threat made against her by one of her own students, a 16-year-old boy here at Stevenson High School in Livonia.
He says specifically about me, he's going to follow me home from the school, and he's going to bludgeon me to death in my driveway. He's going to kill my family. He's going to cremate my body. He says he knows the boiling point of bones, and he says, yes, you should be afraid of me.
The threat recorded by a classmate who says after the student threatened the teacher back in December, she decided to record a second threat a couple days later. The transcript spelled out in this police report.
I want to extend to the very brave student who recorded this. My God, how very courageous that person is.
A statement from Livonia Public Schools says in part, Livonia police, including the school resource officer on site at Stevenson High School, were immediately involved. The student was identified and the district's safety protocols were followed. The student is suspended. Ironically, Livonia Public Schools put out this PSA on school threats the same week.
But if you have something to report to us, if you have concerns, please don't hesitate in contacting us.
But they have not notified parents or students who are learning about the situation through this story, and teachers were not told until 2.5 weeks after the threat. By comparison, similar threats made to an administrator in the Richmond district this month shut down the schools for days, and parents were updated by email.
These are my friends. These are my students. I love these students. I want to protect them.
This case was handed over to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, who tells us on Tuesday there was insufficient evidence for charges. This teacher is going to the feds. The student is still suspended, and a hearing for expulsion is planned.
To describe it as being stressful is kind of the understatement of the century. I mean, every time I'm in my driveway, my head is on a swivel.
A spokesperson with the school says because the threat wasn't a broad threat against the entire school or students, that's why parents were not notified. But that absolutely goes in conflict with some of the other situations we've been covering recently, where the parents are very much kept in the loop. Really, for the first time, a lot of these parents will be hearing about this specific threat from our story. Now, in that police report, it does say that Livonia police did make contact with that child and his parents, and there are no guns in the home. That was one thing they wanted to rule out, but for now, as of tonight, no charges are coming. Reporting live in Livonia, Jessica Dupnack, Fox 2 News.
Yeah, Jess, you hear about the recording, the alleged threats, the specifics, the boiling point of bones. You should be scared. And then the words insufficient evidence. On the other hand, you wonder what else would it take for charges?
Yeah, exactly, Ruben. I think part of the issue here is those threats were made to a third party, not to the teacher directly. I think that has something to do with it. But interesting, part of that police report was redacted, and it does allude that this teacher is somewhere on the list, potentially a hit list. But again, part of the police report was redacted, so we didn't get to see the full extent of that. But I definitely think that it's important that the teacher is going to the feds to maybe get a second set of eyes on the whole situation.
Yeah, chilling allegations coming from that school there at Stevenson. Jessica Dupnack for us live. Thank you.
And And I'm glad the teacher is doing the right thing about this. Because remember, if you make
With far too many of these school threats, the left.
Sorry. And by the way, earlier if you saw what happened, I'm really sorry about that. There was just someone at the door. My lunch. But like she said before, you see something, you say something. You don't just walk away from it. And to that kid who made that threat, there were no guns in the house. You need to watch you gotta watch. You gotta watch what you post. If you hate your teacher, you keep it to yourself. You don't go on Facebook and start saying, well, I'm gonna do this to my teacher, I'm gonna do that to my teacher. You don't make hit lists. Listen, just because the First Amendment says you have the right to say whatever you want, it does not mean that you can just say, just whatever you want. When we come back, Pete Hughes is going to explain again about your rights in your schools. So really, it's really an eye-opener for you to see. Stay with us. A few moments ago, we showed you a threat that happened through a Facebook post and a video. Now people make a complain. Okay, well, what about my rights? As Sid Hughes is going to tell you, he's going to tell you you got some rights. As we go look through the Supreme Court cases that play you and the student, and you might not be too thrilled about what's going on. So here's Sid Hughes.
So we're going to start off with some good news. The actual first case that applies to students in a positive manner is 1943. This is West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett, where a group, a Jehovah's Witness religious group, is basically complaining that they don't want to have to say the Pledge of Allegiance, they don't want to have to salute, and in the 1940s, you were compelled to do so or you could get suspended, and you could see sometimes the saluting was a little bit creepy. But either way, the Supreme Court's going to rule on the side of students who don't want to have to salute, say the Pledge of Allegiance, saying that the government doesn't have the ability to compel you to do that. So it's not so much a freedom of speech kind of idea, but more of kind of a freedom not to have to speak, not to have to act. But the big case, and this is the one you want to study, kiddies, is Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969. So here's the context of the case. It's 1965, the end of 1965, and the Vietnam War is getting a little bit hot, even though it's the Cold War. And Robert Kennedy has basically announced that he wants a truce, a ceasefire, as we approach the Christmas holiday of 1965. And there's a lot of protesters and a lot of anti-war people and a lot of kids that are for this. And that includes the Tinker family. We have John, who is 15, Mary Beth, Paige, Hope, and a friend, Chris Heckard, that get together and they plan on supporting this endeavor by putting on some black armbands and going to the school. And when the Des Moines School District gets hold of this information, and it's not just the high school, but the middle school and the elementary school, they kind of, preempt it by saying, don't you dare. We don't want any of that kind of disturbance when we're trying to do the learning. And the kids do it anyway. And then on December 16th, Mary Beth and Chris Eckhart got suspended. John got suspended the next day. And it probably would have ended there if it wasn't for the lobby group, the civil rights organization, the American Civil Liberties Union, who came in and said, we think we should do something about this. And that case eventually travels to the Supreme Court. They had lost in the lower court of the district court. Court of Appeals was a tie. And now they're there to say that students have some rights. And the court agrees. It's the Warren Court, the liberal activist court, who basically says that it's one thing if you're trying to, promote learning, you're trying to have a calm atmosphere. You're not doing it for that reason. You're doing it because you want to avoid controversy. So students have a right, maybe not to yell in the cafeteria, but they have a right to symbolically protest, even if it's an unpopular opinion, in school. The court says you don't shed your rights at the schoolhouse gate. You got some rights. So enjoy that, because I'm about to poke holes all over your Tinker armband rights. So the first big hole in Tinker is going to be in 1986. It's an episode that occurs in the early 1980s. It's called Bethel School District versus Frazier. And Matthew Frazier is a senior, and he's nominating his friend Jeff to be on the student council. And he gets up there and he says, Jeff is a man who is firm. He is firm in his pants, firm in his character and firm in his belief in our students, and he will use his point to pound away at this. Ugh. The principal immediately suspends Matthew, saying that you've crossed the line. This isn't freedom of speech. And he's basically saying that's not for you to interpret. This is my freedom of speech. This is the Bill of Rights in action. And the court sides on the side of the school, basically saying that the school has an ability to limit, tinker, if it comes to things that they can interpret as being sexual innuendos. And they say, obviously, the kid's referring to that, so we have the right to shut you down on that. And there are current cases. For instance, there's some students, middle school students, who are wearing the I Love Boobies bracelet in the kind of the cancer awareness fundraising spirit, and they were suspended, and they actually won their appeals case. It's not going to the Supreme Court. They said that that was a legitimate freedom of expression, and they're allowed to do that. But you better be careful if you're getting a little bit of, close to the hanky-panky, which is hashtag creepy. For you. This is Morris v. Frederick, 2007. It was an incident that occurred in Anchorage, Alaska in 2002, where a young man by the name of Joseph Frederick wanted to play a little prank. And basically what occurred was there was a Olympic relay coming through town, so Deborah Morris, the principal of the school, released the students early. Joe wasn't there. He showed up a little bit late, but when he showed up across the street from the school, and as the cameras came out, their big moment was going to be on the TV screens. He unhurls the banner, his freedom of speech in action, bong hits for Jesus. I don't know what's going through the kid's head, but I know what's going through Deb Morris's head as she runs across the street and rips it out of his hands. And eventually, he's going to go to the Supreme Court saying, she violated my freedom of speech. She had no right to do that. And the school says, you better sit down, son. Number one, this was sort of a school-sanctioned event. You were supposed to be in school. The school had let out for that purpose. So whether you were there on your own or you're not, you're representing the school. And number two, it's not so much a freedom of speech issue when you're trying to advocate for drug use. And that's interpretable, but the principal gets to make that decision. So even though you're not in school, and even though you believe it's freedom of speech, the school has a right, because it's sending a message about drug use, to not let you put that banner up. So son, you can sit down again because you're suspended. So you want to print an article in the newspaper, don't you? You think you can do whatever you want because it's your freedom? I got news for you. That's going to be limited. This is another Hall and Tinker. It's called Hazelwood versus Kallmeyer, 1988. And the students basically had written some articles that were first shown to the principal. And one of the articles was on divorce. Another one was on teen pregnancy. They were interviewing students, keeping their names anonymous. But the principal was like, I don't think this is a good idea. You're not going to print that. They go all the way to the Supreme Court saying that, if we don't have this freedom of press right in school, how are we going to live it when we get out of school? And the court says, no, school is for learning, and schools have to have the ability to have what's called prior restraint, which means you're going to have maybe more limitations on your freedom of expression when it comes to press in school, because that's not really why you're there. You're there to create a learning environment, and if the school believes it's getting in the way of some kind of pedagogical purpose, then it has the ability to do that. So watch what you print in the newspaper, because you might be going down. Yo, you can't search me. You ain't got no warrant. Fourth Amendment, baby. Psych. Not in school, you don't. This is New Jersey versus TLO, 1985. And basically, these two girls, they're doing a little bit of the smoking in the bathroom. They come out, someone smells it. The vice principal's like, empty your bag. They're like, we're not going to empty my bag. The vice principal's like, I'm going to empty your bag. And bada boom, you have drug paraphernalia. You're out of here. And now she's going to the court saying he didn't have a right to search my bag. He had no probable cause. He didn't go for a warrant. He just on a whim decided he was going to do this. So it's an illegal search. Therefore, you can't use that in a court of law. Matt versus Ohio. Needless to say, the court says, sister, you better sit down because you're in big trouble. And what they come down to is basically saying the school has a safety purpose. They have to have the ability, if there's reasonable suspicion, to be able to search a student's purse. What if there's a gun in there? What if there's something dangerous in there? We can't have this kind of probable cause warrant court thing going on. You have an expectation of privacy, but not an expectation beyond a reasonable suspicion. Who's the reasonable suspicion decider? So I guess that would be, the person in authority. So why don't you empty your pockets? Be careful what you do, kids, because you don't get probable cause. You can't make me pee in a cup. Well, maybe we can. There's actually 2 court cases that deal with student drug testing. Both of them are random drug testing that occur when you join, first an athletic group, and this was the earlier court case. This is Veronia's School District versus Alton, 1995, where a student was joining a sports team and basically said, look, I didn't do anything wrong. You can't make me, give up my pee-pee because you just are randomly drug testing. You have to show I did something wrong. And the court says, not so fast, son. We have a duty in school, not only to send a message about saying no to drugs, but to make sure, especially in athletics, you can't be on the field high. You could get hurt. So we have a duty to protect not only the message, but to protect you. We want to protect you. So therefore, it was held constitutional that schools can do random drug testing when you're joining, let's say, the football team or the baseball team or whatever. Now, the next court case, which is Board of Education versus Earls, 2002, doesn't deal with athletic groups, but competitive non-athletic groups like the chess club or the debate club. And remember, the prior message was, we're doing it for your safety. You could get hurt out there. But the court's going to broaden that. They're going to broaden the hole in your kind of Bill of Rights shield by saying, nope, the message of drugs is so important, we have such a duty to protect that we have the right to do random drug testings if you join the chess club. So there you go, guys. That's all the court cases. You got Tinker versus Des Moines. Put that in your pocket, but be careful because there's holes in that pocket. So, guys,
And there's lots of holes in the pocket. Coming up, a super secret organization like the CIA is going to have secrets. There was in print. You're going to hear the one side of the story from Rob Webb as Bob McEwen takes a second look. Stay with us. A super secret organization like the CIA is going to have secrets. So they did. Then there it was years ago in print and on newspaper. Last month the CIA get a hold of this, something happened. You're going to meet this person that published the story as he gives us full detail about what happened. Here's Bob McEwen with a second look.
We are sick and tired of your excuses.
And I hope that you'll help to put an end to it, because we're tired and we're hurt and we're angry.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
It was an American first. The director of the CIA, one of the country's most secretive institutions, facing the public at a town meeting in South Central Los Angeles.
If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
An extraordinary event in response to an extraordinary accusation that people working with the CIA had a hand in sparking the crack epidemic that has devastated America's inner cities. Those charges came from this man, reporter Gary Webb of the San Jose Mercury News. He became one of the most talked about journalists in the country. His story, the most controversial of the past year, because after investigating the origins of the crack epidemic, he claimed he found a link leading right to the CIA.
Men who were working for the CIA's army were responsible for bringing all that cocaine in Los Angeles that sparked the crack epidemic.
The CIA's army, Webb says, were the Contras, the anti-communist rebels fighting the government of Nicaragua back in the 1980s. An army founded and funded by the CIA. Webb wrote that some Contra supporters smuggled cocaine to America to raise money for their cause.
The CIA has been bringing drugs into this country.
As then CIA Director John Deutsch discovered, it's an accusation that rings true for many, especially for some in the African American community. And Webb's story has taken on a life of its own. On the talk show circuit and the internet, some have even gone beyond Webb's charges to accuse the CIA of conspiring to target young African Americans.
Was the CIA willing to poison our cities with crack cocaine?
On the basis of what you learned, do you believe that there was a conscious decision, a meeting where someone sat down and said, we're going to poison the youth of Black America and here's how we're going to do it?
No, I don't. These guys were looking to raise money, and I don't think it mattered to them where they did it. They just went where they could raise the money.
Gary Webb says his stories were largely based on the testimony of a drug dealer with Contra connections who became a U.S. government witness. But 9 months after the series was published, the controversy continues. Some of the heavyweights of American journalism have examined Webb's work and found it reckless, often wrong. Just this week, Webb was pulled off the CIA story after his own executive editor admitted the articles oversimplified the origins of the crack epidemic and left out important conflicting evidence. He also wrote, "I feel that we did not have proof that top CIA officials knew." But despite the evidence to the contrary, Gary Webb insists his stories were substantially accurate. And many Americans do seem willing to believe that their own government could have been involved in drug smuggling. So was the U.S. government involved in any way? Dateline decided to take a second look. Crack use spread like wildfire in the early 1980s. And in Los Angeles, a drug dealer known as Freeway Ricky Ross was in the middle of it. Prosecutors called Ross the Walmart of crack. He made millions in the early 80s dealing to Los Angeles street gangs. Police say he was among the first to take expensive cocaine powder and cook it into low-cost, highly addictive crack, then distribute it through the gangs. Webb says Freeway Ricky helped trigger an epidemic of human misery.
It's destroyed our community. All the black men are in prison, most of us.
Rick Ross is now serving a life sentence for cocaine distribution.
The women are still strung on the drugs, kids without fathers, without mothers.
And honestly, how much responsibility do you have for that?
A lot. A lot of it was my fault. I played the game.
Police in Los Angeles say he virtually cornered the crack market, thanks to a steady supply of cheap cocaine. A pipeline so good that Ross was able to introduce crack to other cities, using his gang contacts, and to make himself, he says, a very rich man.
On your best day, how much money did you see?
A couple million, 2, 3 maybe.
A day.
A good day.
How many days like that were there?
A few. Quite a few.
Rick Ross's drug supplier did have connections to the Contras. Dateline has been able to confirm that from former Contra leader Eden Pastora. And Pastora admits he received some aid from that drug supplier. But Pastora says he was not aware of any CIA drug connection. So we asked Gary Webb, where is the evidence the CIA knew of any drug dealing?
You have to define the CIA. If you're saying that people who are working with the CIA know they were doing it, yeah. Did the director of the Central Intelligence Agency know this? I don't know.
This is nonsense.
Now retired, Dewey Claridge was the CIA's man in charge of Central America in the early 80s. He insists the agency had nothing to do with any drug trafficking or with any cover-up.
Oh, don't give me the conspiracy bull. Come on, you're a more intelligent man than that. Come on. I mean, come on. This there has never been a conspiracy in this country.
Never? Gary Webb's version of events may be wrong, but in the mid-1980s, there was a high-level White House conspiracy called Iran-Contra.
Whatever you believe, Gary Webb's stories have revived interest in an issue that's been simmering since Ronald Reagan was at the White House. Were U.S. government officials aware of drug smuggling in and around the Contra movement? And did they simply choose to ignore it? One U.S. senator says, absolutely.
There's no question in my mind there is a complicity in the flow of drugs into this country, period.
A Senate investigation led by John Kerry of Massachusetts found that individuals who provided support for the Contras were involved in drug trafficking, and that one or another agency of the U.S. government had information regarding the involvement, either while it was occurring or immediately thereafter. Incredibly, according to Senator Kerry, smugglers even used the U.S. government's own airlift operation at El Salvador's Ilopango airport to get cocaine back across the American border. This drug enforcement agent patrolled that same airport in the mid-80s.
It was just non-stop traffic coming and going, and nobody ever inspected their planes or their cargo or whatever.
Sele Castillo told Dateline he observed rampant drug smuggling at that airport.
Well, what we had was we had contra pilots flying out of Ilopango, smuggling drugs into the U.S., cocaine specifically.
He claims the smuggling was so open it had to be condoned by the U.S. government. Castillo says planes would arrive filled with supplies for the Contras, then leave carrying cocaine for America, bound from military airfields in Florida and Texas, offloaded out of sight of the law, then shipped to California and other points in the U.S. And there's more. Castillo says when he reported all of this to his bosses at the DEA, he was told to ignore it.
So you were told point blank? Point blank, stay away from it. It's a covert operation being run by the White House.
In a letter to Dateline, the Drug Enforcement Administration said it has vigorously investigated, and no evidence has ever been found to substantiate Mr. Castillo's charges. As for the CIA, it's denied ever aiding or condoning drug smuggling.
Reports were reaching the highest councils of our government, in the White House and in the Justice Department. There is no question of that. I can document that.
The White House and Justice Department disputed Kerry's report at the time, but he still believes some government officials turned a blind eye towards drug dealing in the mid-1980s, after the time at the heart of Gary Webb's stories. There were no indictments or prosecutions, and ultimately those allegations of drug smuggling became just a footnote in the scandal known as Iran-Contra. According to Kerry, at the time, American officials were more afraid of the evils of communism than the ravages of crack cocaine.
I'll tell you, South Central Los Angeles and every other city in America are owed an explanation. People knew that drug trafficking was getting mixed up in the flow of weapons. People knew there were bad types involved in this operation. They didn't turn off the spigot. That's plain and simple.
The CIA is reviewing the charges made by Webb and says it will conclude its investigation by the end of the year. The House Select Committee on Intelligence says it will issue its own report and that its investigation will not be affected by the Mercury News' reevaluation of its series.
Sounds like a good point to end on. That's it for the first half of the show. Coming up on the second half, part 2, the rest of the story about James Floyd and his family picking cucumbers. They made it out of Michigan. They made it out of Texas. They made it out of Arkansas. They had hot dogs, juice, bread. Now they're going to go to Ohio to pick the fruit. Dennis Brody continues their journey on the second half. And I'll see you again on that second half. For all of us here at Give Me a Break on YouTube, have a nice day, and I'll see you soon.